The hollows of Tennessee stretched like old wounds under the summer sky of 1855, thick with the hum of cicadas and the heavy scent of pine sap. Elias Holloway rode his mule along the rutted path toward the family cabin, reins loose in his calloused hands. At 32, he was the steady one, the son who mended fences and felled timber without complaint, his broad shoulders bearing the weight of the land as much as his father's expectations. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows that twisted through the underbrush, and Elias felt the familiar pull of home, a place both refuge and cage. Smoke curled from the chimney as he approached, the cabin's weathered logs standing defiant against the encroaching woods. Inside, his wife, Clara, knelt by the hearth, stirring a pot of cornmeal mush. Her dark hair was pinned back, but strands escaped, framing a face etched with quiet worry. At 28, Clara was the cautious heart of the household, her hands quick to soothe fevers or mend tears, always scanning the horizon for storms that hadn't yet broken. She looked up as the door creaked open, her eyes softening. "Elias, the young uns are restless. Supper's near ready." He nodded, hanging his hat on a peg. "Brought venison from the trapline. Enough for days." His voice was low, measured, carrying the drawl of the hills. But as he stepped into the firelight, a chill prickled his skin, not from the evening air, but from the way the flames danced oddly, as if reluctant to touch certain corners of the room. In the corner, old Harlan Holloway sat in his rocker, pipe clenched between tobacco-stained teeth. Elias's father was a shadow of the man who'd cleared this land decades ago, his frame gaunt, eyes sunken like wells. 70 years had bent him, but not broken his silence. He spoke little these days, content to watch the world with a gaze that seemed to pierce through flesh. Beside him, Elias's mother, Miriam, mended a quilt by lamplight. She was frilier still, her silver hair pulled tight, fingers arthritic but precise. The elders, they called them in whispers, the ones who'd outlasted fevers and floods, yet carried an air of something untouched by time. The children burst in then, twins Amos and Eliza, 8 years old and mirrors of mischief. Amos, bold and freckled, tugged at Elias's sleeve. "Pa, tell us about the river spirits again." Eliza, quieter but no less fierce, clutched a corncob doll, her eyes wide with the day's adventures. Clara shooed them to the table, but Elias caught the glance she exchanged with him, the one that spoke of Harlan's growing pallor, the way he'd taken to wandering the woods at dusk. As they ate, the cabin filled with the scrape of spoons and the children's chatter. Harlan rocked slowly, the chairs creak a metronome to the meal. Miriam passed the salt without a word, her movements deliberate. Elias watched the fire's glow play across their faces, but something nagged at him. The elder's skin seemed too smooth in the flickering light, untouched by the ruddy warmth that colored his own. He shook it off, attributing it to the long day, and reached for his bowl. Outside, the woods whispered secrets to the wind, and in the deepening twilight, the first stars pricked the sky like watchful eyes. Elias didn't notice how the moon's pale beams slipped through the window, falling across the table, nor how Harlan and Miriam cast no shadow upon the worn planks beneath their chairs. Elias wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand, the midday sun beating down like a forge hammer on the parched earth of their Tennessee hollow. The Holloway land stretched out in stubborn ridges, tobacco fields wilting under the relentless heat, but it was the barn that drew his eye now, its weathered planks leaning like a drunkard against the hillside. Pa had said to check the livestock before supper, and Elias, ever the dutiful son at 16, trudged toward it with his slingshot tucked in his belt, more habit than need. The air hung thick, carrying the faint rot of damp hay and something sharper, like iron left too long in the rain. Inside, the barn's shadows pooled deep, cutting the glare. Bess, their old mule, stamped lazily in her stall, but it was the chickens that set him on edge, huddled in a feathered knot, clucking low as if whispering secrets. Elias knelt by the coop, peering through the slats. One hen lay still, its neck twisted at an odd angle, blood speckled on the straw like spilled berries. Fox, he thought, though the wire fence looked intact. He reached in to lift the body, fingers brushing cold feathers, when a scrape echoed from the loft above, like claws on wood, deliberate and slow. Heart quickening, Elias straightened, hand drifting to his slingshot. "Who's there?" His voice bounced off the rafters, too boyish for the tremor he felt. Silence answered, broken only by the distant call of a whippoorwill, out of season and wrong in the daylight. He climbed the ladder rung by rung, the wood creaking under his weight, each step pulling him into the loft's gloom. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light piercing the cracks, and there, amid the forgotten crates and cobweb tools, sat Ma's old looking-glass, propped against a beam as if someone had been using it. Elias froze. The glass was tilted just so, capturing the loft in its silvered surface. He saw the crates, the rafters, even the faint outline of his own shoulder as he approached, but nothing else stirred in that reflection. No shadow, no flicker of movement. Yet the scrape came again, closer now, from behind the largest crate. He edged forward, pulse thudding in his ears, and peered around the edge. Nothing. Just empty space. The air cooler here, carrying a chill that raised gooseflesh on his arms. But as he turned back to the mirror, a figure passed across its face, not in the loft, but in the glass itself. Tall, gaunt, with eyes like polished obsidian, it glided without sound, vanishing before Elias could blink. He stumbled back, breath catching, the slingshot clattering to the floor. It wasn't Pa or Uncle Thorne. The family was all accounted for out in the fields. Or so he thought. By the time he scrambled down and burst from the barn, the sun dipped lower, painting the hollow in bruised purples. Elias ran to the house, the dead hen forgotten in his pocket, his mind replaying that impossible glimpse. Ma was at the stove when he slammed the door open, her back to him as she stirred a pot of thin stew. She didn't turn, but her shoulders tensed, the wooden spoon pausing mid-swirl. "Elias," she said softly, voice like dry leaves. "What spooks you, boy?" He hesitated in the doorway, the warmth of the kitchen clashing with the cold knot in his gut. The mirror above the mantel caught his eye, Ma's reflection absent, as always, though he'd never questioned it before. Just a trick of the light, Pa had once laughed off when Elias asked as a child. But now, with the barn's shadow clinging to him, it felt like a lie unraveling. "The barn," he managed. "Something's in there. Watching." Ma set the spoon down, finally facing him. Her face was pale, lined from years under the sun, but her eyes held that same unblinking depth he'd glimpsed in the glass. "Wild things come calling in the heat," she replied, stepping closer. Her hand on his shoulder was cool, too cool for the fire crackling nearby. "Best you stay inside till your pa returns. We'll tend it come dusk." Elias nodded, but as she turned away, he caught his own reflection in the window glass, solid, real, while hers blended into the shadows beyond, as if she were part of them. The hollow seemed to close in, the walls whispering of secrets buried deeper than roots, and for the first time, Elias wondered if the real danger wasn't out in the fields, but right here, in the blood that bound them. Elias Holloway wiped the sweat from his brow, the midday sun beating down on the parched fields like a hammer on anvil iron. The cotton plants drooped, their leaves curling at the edges, whispering of the drought that had gripped Tennessee for weeks now. He leaned on his hoe, glancing back toward the cabin where his wife, Clara, tended to the younger ones. Their boy, Jem, was off by the creek, or what was left of it, a muddy trickle snaking through cracked earth. Elias's gaze lingered on the tree-line, where shadows pooled unnaturally deep despite the glare overhead. Inside the cabin, the air hung thick with the scent of boiled roots and lye soap. Clara knelt by the hearth, stirring a pot that bubbled weakly over low flames. Her hands, calloused from years of mending and churning, paused as she heard the floorboards creak. It was Mother Holloway, Gran as they called her, shuffling from the back room. The old woman's steps were deliberate, her frame slight but unyielding, like a willow bent but not broken by storm winds. Clara straightened, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Supper'll be sparse tonight, Gran." The The stores are running low." Gran settled into her rocker by the window, her gnarled fingers tracing the edge of a quilt. She didn't respond at first, her pale eyes fixed on the glass, watching the world outside without a flicker of reflection in the pane. It was always thus with her, and with Elias's father before the fever took him. Mirrors avoided, silver polished, but never gazed into. The family had long accepted it as a quirk of blood, a silent pact never voiced. But lately, with the land withering and neighbors whispering of omens, Clara felt the weight of it pressing like a stone on her chest. A sharp cry cut through the haze. Jem's voice, high and edged with fear. Clara dropped the ladle, spilling broth onto the dirt floor, and rushed to the door. Outside, Elias was already running toward the creek, his long strides kicking up dust. Jem stood knee-deep in the mud, pointing at the water's edge, where something dark bobbed against the bank, a bloated shape, half submerged, its skin mottled and peeling like old bark.
Pa.
"It's a man, least I think it was. Fish got to it already." Elias reached his son first, hauling him back by the collar. "Stay clear, boy. Could be sickness carrying." Up close, the corpse was unmistakable, a drifter, by the look of his ragged trousers and the empty flask clutched in rigid fingers. But it was the neck that turned Elias's stomach, 2 puncture wounds, neat as needle pricks, crusted over with dried blood. Not animal, not snake. He scanned the banks, the underbrush rustling faintly in the still air. Nothing moved, but the hairs on his arms stood rigid. Clara arrived breathless, Jem clinging to her skirts. She covered the boy's eyes, but not before he glimpsed the horror. "Lord have mercy," she murmured, crossing herself though the Holloways weren't church folk. Gran had appeared at the cabin door, silent as a ghost, her silhouette framed against the dim interior. She didn't approach, didn't call out, but her presence pulled at Elias like an unseen tether. He met her gaze across the distance, and in that moment, the drought's cruelty sharpened, the land dying, strangers washing up marked by the night, and the family's secret festering like an untreated wound. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the hills in bruised purples, the Holloways gathered around the table. The drifter's body lay wrapped in burlap behind the barn, a grim duty Elias would see to at dawn. Jem poked at his plate of cornbread and beans, his face pale. "Was it the devil's work, Ma? Like the stories Gran tells?" Clara shot Gran a look, but the old woman only rocked slowly, her lips pressed thin. "No such thing," Elias said firmly, though his voice carried a hollow ring. He pushed back his chair, the scrape loud in the quiet room. "Just hardship and bad luck. We'll report it to the sheriff come mornin'." But as he stepped onto the porch, the night air cool against his skin, he couldn't shake the image of those punctures. Gran's stories weren't fables, they were warnings, passed down like heirlooms. And now, with the creek running dry and shadows lengthening, Elias wondered if the family's unspoken curse was stirring, hungry for more than blood. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent, as a distant howl echoed from the woods, coyote or something older. Elias Holloway wiped the sweat from his brow, the Tennessee sun beating down like a forge hammer on the family's modest cabin. It was midday, and the air hung thick with the scent of pine and drying tobacco leaves from the fields beyond. His wife, Clara, knelt by the hearth inside, stirring a pot of cornmeal mush, her movements precise despite the heat. Their son, young Thomas, barely 10, played with a whittled stick near the door, oblivious to the shadows that seemed to lengthen unnaturally across the wooden floor. Elias stepped out to the porch, his calloused hands gripping the rail as he scanned the treeline. The elders, his father and Aunt Miriam, hadn't been seen since dawn. They'd taken to these vanishing acts more frequently, slipping into the woods without a word, returning only after dusk with eyes too bright and skin too pale. Last night, Miriam had cornered him in the barn, her breath cold as winter frost, whispering about the old blood that bound them all. He'd laughed it off then, but now, with the mirror in the cabin shattered for the 3rd time that week, doubt gnawed at him like a persistent ache. "Pa, you reckon they'll bring back them berries?" Thomas called, his voice cutting through the haze. The boy scrambled up, stick in hand, his freckled face earnest under a mop of auburn hair. Elias forced a smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. Maybe, son. Best not to wander off, Wing. He ruffled Thomas's hair, guiding him back inside where Clara could keep watch. She glanced up from her work, her sharp green eyes holding a question she wouldn't voice, not with the boy near. Clara was the cautious one, always had been, her bravery shown in quiet endurance rather than bold words. But lately, her hands trembled when she thought no one noticed. As the afternoon wore on, Elias set to repairing the fence near the creek, the rhythmic thud of his hammer a small anchor against the unease. The water ran low this season, exposing roots that twisted like veins beneath the surface. He paused once, catching a flicker of movement upstream. A deer, perhaps, or something else. The animal bolted, vanishing into the underbrush without a sound. Elias straightened, hammer forgotten, when a chill wind stirred the leaves despite the heat. Clara appeared at the edge of the yard, wiping her hands on her apron. "Elias," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of unspoken fears. Thomas found this by the back path. She held out a scrap of cloth, torn and stained dark. Miriam's shawl, the one embroidered with faded roses. It smelled of earth and something metallic, like blood long dried. He took it, fingers tracing the frayed edges. They must have caught on a branch. Nothing more. But his words rang hollow even to him. The shawl was clean yesterday, tucked away in the chest. She stepped closer, her gaze steady. "We can't keep pretendin'. Last full moon your father he didn't eat. And the mirrors." A rustle from the woods cut her off. Elias shoved the shawl into his pocket, grabbing the rifle from its hook on the porch. "Stay with Thomas," he murmured, his voice low and urgent. Clara nodded, retreating inside, but he saw the resolve in her posture, the way she barred the door with a chair leg, just in case. The forest path was narrow, choked with ferns and the hum of cicadas. Elias moved cautiously, his boots silent on the mossy ground. The air grew cooler as he delved deeper, shadows pooling under the canopy like ink. He called out once, "Father? Miriam?" No answer, only the echo fading into silence. Then a snap, branch underfoot too deliberate to be wind. He raised the rifle, heart pounding a steady rhythm. Ahead, through a break in the trees, he saw them. His father, stooped and gaunt, kneeling by a fallen log. Miriam stood beside him, her back to Elias, her long skirts muddied. They weren't gathering berries. In the dim light, Elias glimpsed what they held, a small, wriggling form, a rabbit perhaps, its cries muffled. "Father," Elias said, stepping forward, his voice firmer than he felt. The old man turned slowly, his face a mask of hollow cheeks and unblinking eyes. No reflection in the nearby puddle, Elias noted with a sick lurch, just the blurred image of the trees behind. Miriam straightened, her lips curving in a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "Elias, boy, come join us." The hunger's Callan stronger now. He froze, the rifle heavy in his grip. The rabbit stilled, and a drop of red fell to the earth, soaking in without a trace. Clara's words echoed in his mind, but here, in the green gloom, the truth clawed its way free. The elder's secret wasn't madness or illness. It was older, hungrier, and it waited for him to step into its shadow. Elias wiped the sweat from his brow, the midday sun beating down on the parched earth like a hammer on an anvil. The creek bed, once a lively ribbon through the hollow, now lay cracked and barren, mocking their efforts with its silence. He'd been out since dawn with Pa, digging a new trench to divert what little water remained from the spring higher up the ridge. Pa's hands, calloused and steady, moved the shovel with a rhythm that spoke of years unyielding to hardship, but even he paused now, leaning on the handle, his eyes fixed on the horizon where thunderheads gathered like unspoken promises. "Storm's comin'," Pa said, voice low as if the words might scare it off. He straightened, wiping dirt from his palms onto his trousers. Elias nodded, feeling the weight of the unspoken. The farm's crops were wilting, the livestock thinning, and with Ma's strange ailment keeping her indoors at odd hours, the burden fell heavier on them. Clara had stayed back at the cabin, tending to the herbs Ma insisted on gathering at twilight, her small hands quick but her face pale with questions she never voiced. As they trudged back, the first rumbles echoed through the valley, shaking loose pebbles from the hillside. Elias glanced at Pa's side profile, the man's jaw set firm, but there was a flicker in his eyes, a wariness that had deepened since the night Elias caught him staring at Ma's mirror in the dim lantern light. No reflection, just the empty glass staring back like a void. Pa had brushed it off as a trick of the shadows, but Elias knew better. The elders in the family tales, those who came over from the old country, carried secrets that twisted in the blood. The cabin came into view, smoke curling lazily from the chimney, despite the heat. Clara burst from the door before they reached the porch, her apron dusted with soil, eyes wide. Elias. You won't believe. Ma's fever broke, but she smashed the looking glass in the parlor. Said it lied to her. Pa's face tightened, and he quickened his pace, boots thudding against the dry ground. Elias followed, a chill prickling his neck despite the rising humidity. Inside, the air hung thick with the scent of crushed lavender and something sharper, metallic. Ma sat by the window, her dark hair unbound, hands folded in her lap as if nothing amiss. Shards glittered on the floorboards, catching the light in jagged prisms. "What possessed you, woman?" Pa demanded, though his tone held more plea than anger. He knelt, gathering the pieces carefully, avoiding her gaze. Ma's lips curved in a faint smile, her skin unnaturally smooth for her years, like polished river stone. "It showed me nothing, Josiah. Nothing at all. And I tire of pretending." Her voice was steady, but her fingers twitched, betraying the lie. Elias hovered in the doorway, heart pounding. Clara sidled up beside him, whispering, "She wouldn't let me near it after," said the reflection's steel pieces of the soul. The thunder cracked closer now, rattling the windows. Pa rose, the broken glass clutched in his handkerchief, and met Ma's eyes at last. "We'll speak of this later. Storm's upon us. Bar the shutters." But as he turned away, Elias saw the tremor in his shoulders, the first crack in the man who'd faced down floods and fevers without flinching. Rain began to lash the roof as Elias helped Clara secure the doors, the drops hissing against the hot tin like secrets spilling out. Outside, the wind howled through the oaks, bending branches that clawed at the sky. In the flickering light of the hearth, Ma hummed an old tune from the hollows, one Elias half remembered from childhood nights, words about shadows that walked without masters. He stole a glance at the empty spot where the mirror had hung, a blank wall, staring back like an accusation. That evening, as the storm raged and the family huddled around the table with meager stew, Pa broached the unspoken. "The elders, they came with burdens from across the sea. Curses, some call 'em, but we endure." His fork scraped the tin plate, the sound cutting through the downpour. Ma nodded slowly, her eyes distant, fixed on the rain-streaked window where lightning etched veins across the dark. Clara leaned forward, her cautious nature yielding to curiosity. "Does it spread? Like the ague?" Her voice trembled, but she held Pa's gaze, brave in her small way. Pa hesitated, the fire casting long shadows that danced unnaturally, avoiding the corners where Ma sat. "Not like sickness. It's in the blood, chosen or not. But we fight it with light, with work." He reached for Ma's hand, but she pulled back gently, her palm pale against the wood. Elias felt the air thicken, the storm outside mirroring the one building within. He'd seen the signs before, the way Ma avoided the noonday sun, her strength waning with the moon's pull, but hearing it voiced made it real, a threat coiling tighter than the drought's grip. As lightning flashed again, illuminating the room in stark white, he wondered if the rain would wash away the secrets or merely drown them deeper. Night fell heavy, the storm unrelenting. Elias lay on his pallet, listening to the patter on the roof, Clara's soft breathing nearby. Pa's snores rumbled from the next room, but Ma was silent, her presence a void in the dark. He rose quietly, drawn to the parlor where the broken mirror lay wrapped in cloth on the mantel. Unfurling it just enough, he peered at a shard, holding his breath. His face stared back, clear and boyish, but when he angled it toward Elias gripped the lantern tighter, its flame flickering like a heartbeat against the damp walls of the root cellar. The air down here was thick with the scent of earth and something sharper, metallic, like old pennies spilled in the dark. Sarah huddled beside him, her breath coming in shallow bursts, while young Tommy clutched her skirt, his wide eyes darting to every shadow. They'd come here after the whispers started, those faint scratches from upstairs, like nails on wood, growing insistent since dusk. The plan had been simple: hide until the elders went out hunting, whatever that truly meant. But now, with the trapdoor above rattling softly, Elias wondered if simplicity was just another word for foolhardy. "Quiet," he murmured, though the word barely escaped his lips. Sarah nodded, her face pale in the lantern's glow, but Tommy whimpered, a small sound that echoed too loudly. Elias shot him a look, brave facade cracking just a fraction. Upstairs, the elders, Ma and Pa Holloway, moved with that unnatural grace, their footsteps silent as ghosts. Elias had seen it last night, when Pa leaned over the basin to wash, his form sharp in the firelight, but leaving no blur on the water's surface. No reflection, just absence like a hole cut in the world. The rattling stopped, replaced by a low hum, almost a voice, seeping through the cracks. Sarah's hand found Elias's arm, nails digging in. "They're calling," she whispered, voice trembling. "Tommy's name. They know we're down here." Elias swallowed hard, tasting dust. The initial plan, to slip away at midnight, following the creek to the nearest town, had unraveled when Tommy tripped over a loose board, alerting the house. Now they were trapped, the cellar's single exit sealed by that heavy oak door, bolted from above. He set the lantern down and pressed his ear to the dirt wall, listening. Nothing but the hum, closer now, weaving through the soil like roots seeking light. "We can't stay," Elias said, forcing steadiness into his tone. He was the brave one, after all, the brother who'd climbed the tallest oak to fetch eggs from the crow's nest, who'd faced down the miller's mean hound with nothing but a stick. But this felt different, heavier, like the air itself conspired against them. Sarah pulled Tommy closer, her cautious nature blooming into quiet resolve. Then what? The windows too small, and the shovels rusted through. Elias scanned the dim space. Shelves of jars, half empty with preserves gone sour. The old scythe propped in the corner, its blade dulled by years of neglect. An idea sparked, reckless but born of desperation. "We dig." "Not out, under the east wall, where the foundation cracks. I saw it last spring after the rains." Sarah's eyes widened, but she didn't argue, just nodded, helping Tommy to his feet. They set to work with the scythe and bare hands, the soil yielding grudgingly, clumping under their nails. Each scrape sent tremors up Elias's arms, and the hum grew, threading words now. Asterisk come up. Children. It's time. Asterisk sweat beaded on Elias's brow as the hole deepened, no more than a foot when the lantern sputtered low. Tommy, small and wiry, wriggled in first, his giggles muffled by fear. Sarah followed, her dress snagging on roots, and Elias pushed after, the earth closing like a grave around his shoulders. They emerged in the crawl space beneath the cabin, moonlight slanting through gaps in the floorboards above. The hum was a roar here, vibrating the planks, and shadows shifted, long, elongated, without sources. "Run," Elias gasped, pulling them toward the far wall. But as they scrambled, a floorboard creaked open like a jaw, and Pa's face appeared, inverted and serene, eyes gleaming without pupils. No reflection in the silver locket he dangled, just endless dark. "Elias," he said softly, voice like wind through hollow bones. "You've always been the bold one. Come see what boldness earns." Sarah screamed, a raw sound that cut the night, and Tommy bolted first, toward the open door at the cabin's rear. Elias grabbed her hand, hauling her up, but Pa's arm extended, Too long, too pale, snagging Elias's boot. Fabric tore, skin scraped raw, and pain lanced up his leg as he kicked free. They tumbled out into the yard, the creaks murmur a distant promise, but the elders were already there, waiting in the treeline, their forms blending with the mist rising from the damp ground. No shadows trailed them, only the void where shadows should be. Elias's chest burned as they ran, branches whipping his face, the wound on his ankle throbbing with each step. Sarah glanced back once, her face streaked with dirt and tears. "They won't stop," she panted. "Not now that we've seen." Tommy tripped into a briar patch, crying out, and Elias lifted him without breaking stride, the boy's weight a anchor pulling at his resolve. The forest swallowed them, but the hum followed, a persistent thread in the wind, hinting that escape was just the beginning of the unraveling. Behind, the cabin loomed, its windows dark mirrors reflecting nothing but the stars. Elias gripped the lantern's handle tighter, its flame flickering against the damp walls of the root cellar. The air hung heavy with the scent of earth and decay, and every creak from the floorboards above sent a shiver through him. He'd come down here alone after supper, driven by the whispers he'd overheard from Ma and Pa earlier that day, something about the elders and the old mirrors in the attic. The family had always avoided looking too long into reflective surfaces, a quirk passed down like the shape of their noses, or the way they favored cornbread over biscuits. But tonight, with the moon full and pressing through the cracks in the barn roof, Elias couldn't shake the itch to understand. He scanned the shelves lined with jars of preserves, their glass catching the light in dull glints. No mirrors down here, but he'd found the leather-bound journal wedged behind a crate of potatoes, its pages yellowed and brittle. Sitting cross-legged on the cold dirt floor, he cracked it open, the spine protesting with a soft groan. The handwriting was Pa's grandfather's, from the look of the looping script, dated 1823. Elias's eyes darted over the words, heart quickening as he read of a night much like this one, when the Holloway elders had gathered under the harvest moon. "Them that came before us," the journal began, "they don't throw shadows nor catch light in glass. We seen it plain as day when Uncle Josiah shattered the big looking-glass in the parlor. No scream from him, just a quiet step back, like he'd glimpsed something unholy starin' back, or not starin' at all." Elias paused, glancing up at the ladder leading to the kitchen. The house was silent now, save for the distant hoot of an owl. He turned the page, fingers smudged with dust. It spoke of a curse, or maybe a gift, tied to the family's arrival in Tennessee from some foggy hollow in Virginia. The elders, great-grandfolks who'd crossed the mountains in covered wagons, had made a pact with shadows themselves, or so the stories went. In exchange for strength in the wild lands, they'd forfeited their reflections, becoming ghosts in mirrors while flesh and blood in the world. Elias rubbed his chin, feeling the stubble there. He'd never noticed anything amiss in the wash basin or the tin cup at breakfast, but then again, who lingered on such things? A soft thump echoed from above, like boots on wood. Elias froze, snuffing the lantern with a quick pinch. Darkness swallowed the cellar, thick and absolute. He waited, breath shallow, until the sound came again, closer this time, a rhythmic tap at the trapdoor. "Elias? That you down there?" It was Lila's voice, his sister, cautious but edged with that familiar worry she wore like an apron. He cleared his throat, voice muffled. "Yeah, just check in on the stores. Go back to bed." The trapdoor creaked open a sliver, moonlight spilling down like spilled milk. Lila's face appeared, pale and framed by her unbound hair. "Pa's calling for you. Says the elders are restless tonight. You best come up for he fetches you himself." Elias shoved the journal into his shirt, the leather warm against his skin. As he climbed the ladder, the weight of the words clung to him heavier than the dirt on his boots. Up in the kitchen, the family was gathered around the table, faces drawn in the firelight. Ma stirred a pot of chicory coffee, her movements deliberate, while Pa stared into the flames, his broad shoulders hunched. Cousin Theo, visiting from the next county, leaned back in his chair, whittling a stick with quick, nervous strokes. "Sit," Pa said without looking up. Moon's high, and the air's turnin' sour. Them elders they been walkin' the ridge again. Elias slid into a seat, the journal burning a hole against his chest. He nodded, keeping his eyes on the table's scarred surface. Lila hovered by the stove, twisting her hands. Theo glanced at him, knife pausing mid-cut. Heard tell from the neighbors, Theo muttered. That old widow Hargrove up the holler swears she saw shapes in her barn last night, tall as men, but slippin' like smoke when the lanterns swung their way. Pa grunted, finally meeting Elias's gaze. Ain't just shapes. It's blood callin' to blood. Your grandpappy warned me this'd come round again. Full moon in October. We gotta burn the old relics tonight, afore they pull us in full. Elias's stomach twisted. The relics, shards of mirror, locks of hair from the elders, buried under the oak out back. He'd played near that tree as a boy, never knowing. What if we don't? He asked, voice steady despite the fear coiling in his gut. Pa's eyes hardened, reflecting the fire like twin coals. Then we join him. No reflection, no soul to call our own. Just wanderin' the dark, hungerin' for what we lost. The room fell quiet, save for the crackle of the hearth. Lila poured the coffee, hands trembling just enough to slop a drop onto the floor. Elias felt the journal shift, its secrets pressing. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters like impatient fingers. They rose as one, grabbing coats and lanterns, stepping into the chill night. The ridge loomed ahead, black against the starry sky, and Elias wondered if his own face would stare back from the creek's edge, or if the water would show only the moon, empty of him. As they trudged toward the oak, Theo fell back beside him, voice low. The lantern's flame guttered in the damp cave air, casting jagged shadows that danced like fingers across the uneven walls. Elias pressed his back against the cold stone, his breath coming in shallow bursts as he listened to the distant drip of water echoing through the tunnels. Mary's hand trembled in his, her fingers slick with sweat, while Tom crouched nearby, fiddling with the crude map they'd scratched into a scrap of bark earlier that evening. The air smelled of earth and something sharper, metallic, like blood left too long in the open. We can't stay here, Mary whispered, her voice barely cutting through the gloom. Her eyes, wide and shadowed, flicked toward the tunnel mouth where moonlight slanted in like a reluctant intruder. They'll find us. The elders, they always do. Elias nodded, though doubt gnawed him. The Holloway farm had been their world, rolling hills of tobacco fields under Tennessee's relentless sun, but now it felt like a trap closing around them. Pa and Gran, those stern figures who'd raised them with iron rules and unspoken warnings, had revealed their curse in the barn that night. No reflections in the polished tin mirror Elias had found hidden in the loft. Their faces, pale and unchanging, stared back as voids. Vampires, the old tales called them, but this was no story from the fireside. This was their blood, their kin, turning hunter. Tom snorted softly, folding the bark map with deliberate care. Find us? In this maze? I've been mapping these caves since I was knee-high. They might sniff the air like dogs, but they don't know the shortcuts like I do. His wit masked the fear Elias saw in the tight line of his jaw, the way his free hand clutched the sharpened stake fashioned from an oak branch. Brave words from the youngest, but Elias knew better than to call him on it. Not now, with the stakes as real as the chill seeping into their bones. A low rumble echoed from deeper in the cave, like gravel shifting under heavy boots. Elias's heart lurched. He doused the lantern with a quick breath, plunging them into near blackness pierced only by faint starlight filtering from cracks above. Quiet, he hissed, pulling Mary closer. They huddled as one, the three of them a nod of defiance against the unknown. The family's secret had unraveled fast, Gran catching Tom spying on her midnight wanderings, her skin unmarked by the sun's bite, her eyes gleaming with unnatural hunger. Pa's confession followed, a desperate plea to flee before the hunger turned on them. But the elders moved like shadows, faster than reason allowed, and the farm's borders had become a cage. The rumble grew closer, accompanied by a whisper of fabric against stone. Elias strained to see, his eyes adjusting to the dimness. A silhouette emerged at the tunnel's bend, tall, unyielding, like paw but twisted by the night. "Children," the voice called, smooth as river silk but laced with frost. It was Gran, her steps silent now, deliberate. "Come out. The blood calls you home." Mary stifled a gasp, her nails digging into Elias's palm. Tom's hand tightened on the stake, knuckles white. Elias's mind raced. Their plan had been simple: slip into the caves beneath the ridge, the ones Pa had always forbidden, and follow the underground stream to the river beyond. Safety in the flowing water. Or so the whispers from traveling preachers suggested. Vampires shunned it, bound by some ancient aversion. But the stream had forked unexpectedly hours ago, and Tom's map led them astray into this dead-end chamber. Now, trapped, the weight of failure pressed like the cave's ceiling. "We fight or we run," Elias murmured, his voice steady despite the tremor in his chest. Brave, that's what Mary always called him, but bravery felt thin here, stretched over terror. He scanned the walls, spotting a narrow fissure high up, barely wide enough for a child. "Tom, you first. Boost him up." Tom shook his head, eyes locked on the approaching shadow.
"No."
"We go together, or not at all." His wit faltered, replaced by raw determination. The silhouette paused, as if scenting their fear, and a soft chuckle echoed, Gran's, devoid of warmth. The air thickened, charged with the promise of pursuit. Elias shoved Tom toward the fissure, ignoring his protest.
"Go.
Tell the neighbors, get help." Mary nodded, tears streaking her face, and together they hoisted Tom up. His small frame wedged through, vanishing with a scrape of boots. Then Mary, her cautious nature yielding to necessity as she climbed, whispering prayers under her breath. Gran's form loomed closer, her reflectionless eyes catching the starlight like polished obsidian. Elias backed away, stake in hand, heart pounding a war drum. The cost of this night, their home lost, family fractured, hung heavy, but surrender wasn't in the Holloway blood.
"Not yet."
As Mary's legs disappeared into the crevice, Elias turned to face the elder, the cave's chill mirroring the dread coiling in his gut. The hunt was far from over. Elias gripped the lantern tighter, its flame flickering against the damp walls of the old root cellar beneath the Holloway homestead. The air hung heavy with the scent of turned earth and something sharper, like iron left too long in the rain. He'd come down here alone after supper, the family's uneasy truce shattered by the day's revelations. Ma and Pa had retired early, their faces gaunt in the firelight, but Elias knew better than to trust the quiet. The elders, those spectral aunts and uncles who'd lingered in whispers since his childhood, never truly rested. He scanned the shelves lined with jars of preserves, their labels faded and curling. Somewhere in this gloom, the family Bible lay hidden, the one Pa swore held the truth about their bloodline. Elias's fingers trembled as he pushed aside crocks of pickled beans, dust sifting onto his boots like fine ash. The challenge wasn't just finding it, it was facing what it might say. All week, the mirrors in the house had been covered, but last night, he'd glimpsed Uncle Thaddeus's form in the barn window. No shadow, no reflection, just a void where the light bent wrong. A soft scrape echoed from the far corner, like nails on wood. Elias froze, heart pounding in his ears. "Who's there?" His voice came out steadier than he felt, but the lantern swung wild in his grip, casting jagged shadows that danced like fingers reaching. No answer, only the drip of water from a crack in the ceiling. He edged forward, boots squelching in the mud, remembering little sister's warning that morning. "The elders watch when the moon's full, Eli. They pull you in if you're not careful." The scrape came again, closer. Elias swung the lantern low, illuminating a figure huddled against the wall, his cousin Amos, knees drawn up, face pale as milk. "Amos? What in tarnation are you doing down here?" Relief flooded Elias, but it soured quick when he saw the boy's eyes, wide and glassy, fixed on something beyond the light. "They're comin', Eli," Amos whispered, voice cracking like dry twigs. Heard 'em in the walls, singin' that old tune Ma used to hum. He clutched a rusted shovel like a talisman, dirt caked under his nails from digging who knows what. Elias knelt beside him, the cold seeping through his trousers. Amos had always been the cautious one, the boy who double-checked the barn doors before dusk. But now, fear had carved lines into his young face, making him look older than his 15 years. "We can't run forever," Elias said, keeping his tone even, though his mind raced. The plan had been simple. Uncover the Bible, read the rites Pa's father had scrawled there to bind the elders back. But Amos's trembling hands told him they'd waited too long. The full moon hung fat outside, pulling at the family's secrets like a tide. "Tell me what you found," Elias urged, glancing at the shadowed recesses. Amos shook his head, but after a long breath, he pointed to a loose floorboard nearby. "Dug it up this afternoon. Ain't the Bible, but look." He pried the board free with the shovel's edge, revealing a bundle wrapped in oilcloth, stained dark with age. Elias unwrapped it carefully, the cloth crackling in the stillness. Inside lay a silver locket, heavy and etched with Holloways, twisted trees that seemed to writhe in the lantern's glow. He snapped it open, and there, etched on the inner lid, was a miniature portrait, Great Aunt Miriam, her eyes staring out, but no reflection in the tiny mirror behind her. Just emptiness. A chill crawled up Elias's spine, colder than the cellar's damp. Before he could speak, a low hum rose from the walls, vibrating through the stone like a distant train. Amos bolted upright. "It's Thumb. The song, listen." The hum swelled into words, faint but insistent. Blood to blood, no light to flee. Elias's blood ran cold. It was the lullaby from his nightmares, the one that had driven his own father to cover every shiny surface in the house. "Grab the locket. We're getting out," Elias hissed, stuffing it into his pocket. But as they scrambled for the ladder, the lantern sputtered, the flame dipping low. Darkness pressed in, thick and alive, and Elias swore he saw shapes uncoiling from the corners, tall, elongated figures with faces blurred, reaching without shadows. Amos reached the ladder first, his boots thudding on the rungs. Elias followed, the hum chasing them upward, words twisting into pleas. "Join us, child, in endless night." They burst into the kitchen, slamming the trapdoor shut behind them. Ma stood at the stove, stirring a pot that hadn't been touched, her back to them. But when she turned, her eyes held that same glassy stare Amos had worn below. "Eli," she said softly, too softly, "why dig up what's buried? The elders only want what's theirs." Elias backed away, hand on the locket burning through his shirt. The plan had backfired, the Bible untouched, the truth only deeper in the dark. Outside, the moon watched through the window, full and unblinking, and Elias knew the night was far from over. The family's curse wasn't just in the blood, it was in the choices they made under its pull. And, tonight, it hungered for more. Elias gripped the lantern's handle until his knuckles ached, the flame inside flickering like a heartbeat against the damp walls of the root cellar. The air hung thick with the scent of turned earth and something sharper, blood, perhaps, or the metallic tang of fear. He had followed the faint scuff marks down here after midnight, when the house above had fallen silent under the weight of unspoken dread. His sister Clara trailed behind, her breath coming in shallow bursts, one hand clutching the silver locket their mother had worn until the end. The cellar stretched deeper than Elias remembered, its packed dirt floor sloping into shadow. He held the lantern high, casting jagged pools of light that danced over barrels and forgotten jars. No reflections here, not from the glass, not from the puddles left by last night's rain. But the elders, Grandfather Holloway and Aunt Miriam, had always avoided mirrors, claiming it was a family quirk, a vanity shunned by the pious. Now, in the wake of Uncle Thomas's vanishing 2 nights prior, Elias wondered if it was something far worse. A low rasp echoed from the far corner, like cloth tearing slowly. Clara froze, her eyes wide in the dim glow. "Elias," she whispered, her voice threading through the chill, "we shouldn't have come alone. What if they're waiting?" He didn't answer, couldn't, as his boot nudged something soft. The lantern swung low, revealing a smear of red across the floor, fresh, trailing toward a half-buried crate. Elias's stomach twisted. Thomas's coat, that's what it was, crumpled there with dark stains blooming like ink. He knelt, fingers trembling as he lifted the fabric. Beneath it, a sliver of bone gleamed white, snapped clean. The rasp grew louder, closer, slithering from the shadows. Elias jerked upright, lantern raised like a shield. "Show yourself." His voice cracked, but he forced it steady, the brave front he'd worn since their father's death in the mill accident. Clara stepped forward, her cautious nature yielding to the pull of necessity, pulling a small knife from her apron, the one she'd sharpened by the hearth that afternoon. From the gloom emerged a figure, hunched and swaying, skin pale as moonlight on milk. It was Aunt Miriam, but not as Elias knew her. Her eyes, once sharp with quiet wisdom, now burned with an unnatural hunger, pupils dilated to black pits. She moved without a shadow trailing her feet, the lantern's light bending oddly around her form. No reflection in the nearby bucket of water, just her shape blotting the light. "Children," she murmured, voice a dry wind through dead leaves, "you've wandered where the family bond frays. Come closer. Let me explain the old ways." Clara's knife hand shook. "Explain why Thomas is gone, why the mirrors stay covered upstairs." Her words tumbled out, laced with the wit that had always masked her fear, sharp, probing, like pinning a moth to a board. Miriam's lips curled, not quite a smile. Thomas resisted. "The elders, we sustain the bloodline. Without reflection, we endure. Join us, or fade like the others." Elias's mind raced, piecing the fragments, the late-night gatherings in the attic, the way grandfather's hands grew colder each winter, the livestock found drained in the fields. This wasn't piety, it was a curse, woven into their veins since the old country, binding the Holloways to shadows. He glanced at Clara, saw the resolve hardening in her eyes. They couldn't run, not with the cellar's only exit a narrow ladder behind them, and Miriam blocking the way. "Clara, the oil," Elias hissed, nodding toward the lantern. She understood instantly, her cautious steps turning bold as she uncorked a hidden flask from her pocket, lamp oil mixed with holy water from the church font, a desperate hunch born of Sunday sermons. Miriam lunged, faster than her frail frame suggested, nails extended like claws. Elias swung the lantern, the glass shattering against her shoulder in a burst of flame. Oil splashed, igniting her sleeve, and she recoiled with a shriek that rattled the jars overhead. Clara dashed forward, slashing with the knife, drawing a line of black ichor from Miriam's arm. No blood, just darkness seeping like tar. They bolted for the ladder, Miriam's cries echoing as fire licked the walls. Elias hauled Clara up first, her hands slick with sweat. As he climbed, he looked back, Miriam's form twisted in the blaze, but her eyes fixed on him, promising the family's secret would claim them all. Upstairs, the house groaned under dawn's first light filtering through the shutters. Elias barred the cellar door, heart pounding. Clara leaned against him, knife still clutched tight. "Grandfather," she said softly, "he'll know we know." Elias nodded, the weight settling. The challenge wasn't just Miriam, it was the lineage itself, a hunger that demanded tribute. And with Thomas gone, the cost pressed closer. Their own reflections might soon vanish if they didn't break the chain. Outside, the Tennessee hills stirred with morning mist, hiding whatever stalked the family next. The lantern's flame guttered in the draft seeping through the cabin's warped planks, casting jagged shadows that clawed at the walls like the fingers of the damned. Elias Holloway gripped the iron poker tighter, his knuckles whitening against the soot-streaked metal. At 22, he was the eldest of the living Holloways now, his father's place taken by a void that still echoed with unspoken curses. Beside him, his sister Clara huddled, her breath shallow and ragged, the locket at her throat, containing a faded tintype of their mother, rising and falling like a fragile bellows. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and something sharper, metallic, like blood long dried. They had come back to the old homestead at dusk, the one their grandparents had built before the fever took half the county in 43. The plan was simple. Burn the root cellar where the elders lurked, the ones who no longer walked in daylight and whose forms never marred mirrors or still ponds. Elias had seen it himself as a boy, watching Grandpa Jedediah's silhouette stretch toward the hearth fire without a shadow trailing behind. "They're bound to the dirt," he'd whispered to Clara on the trail from Nashville, where they'd fled after Pa's vanishing last harvest. "Fire'll unbind 'em for good." But simplicity shattered when they pried open the cellar door. The hinges screamed like a gutted hog, and from the blackness below rose a murmur, not words, but a susurrus of wind through dead leaves, pulling at their resolve. Clara had hesitated then, her hand trembling on the lantern. What if it's not them? What if it's us next? Elias had shoved the doubt down, lighting the torch from the lantern and thrusting it toward the steps. The flames licked hungrily at the dry timbers, but the murmur grew into a chorus, and shadows uncoiled from the depths, formless at first, then sharpening into outlines that mimicked human shapes. Now, as the fire caught along the support beams with a crackle that drowned their heartbeats, Elias felt the first true pull. It started in his chest, a cold thread winding around his ribs, tugging him toward the stairs. Clara gasped, dropping the sack of kindling she'd been scattering. "Elias, look." She pointed, her voice a threadbare whisper. In the flickering light, their reflections danced in the cracked mirror propped against the far wall, the one Ma had cherished for its silver frame. But Elias's image lagged, a heartbeat behind his turn of the head, and Clara's eyes in the glass stared not at him, but passed into the smoke-choked gloom. The elders emerged then, not as the withered husks Elias remembered from childhood tales, but as silhouettes stitched from night itself. Grandma Etta led them, her form tall and unyielding, the bonnet she wore in life now a crown of frayed lace that blended with the dark. No face showed, only the negative space where features should be, and when she reached the top step, the air thickened, pressing against Elias's lungs like a sodden quilt. "Boy," the space intoned, voice echoing from a throat that wasn't there, "you carry our blood. Join the unmirrored." Clara lunged forward, swinging the poker she'd snatched from Elias's loosened grip. It passed through Etta's form with a hiss, like iron through fog, but the shadow recoiled, the murmur spiking into a wail that rattled the jars on the shelves. Glass shattered, shards glinting like fallen stars amid the growing blaze. Elias shook off the tug, grabbing Clara's arm and yanking her back toward the door. "Run now." Flames leaped higher, devouring the ladder they'd climbed, trapping the elders below as the cellar roof groaned in protest. They burst into the night, the cabin's silhouette framed against the moonless sky, a pyre already blooming orange. Clara stumbled over roots, her skirts catching on briars, but Elias hauled her upright, the cold thread in his chest fraying, yet not snapping. Behind them, the wail twisted into laughter, low and knowing, as if the fire were merely a veil lifting. He glanced back once, seeing shapes press against the cellar's mouth, unburnt, unchanging. The mirror from inside tumbled out, landing face up in the dirt, and in its surface, Elias caught a glimpse, not of fleeing figures, but of himself and Clara standing still, shadows blooming where their reflections should end. Dawn was hours away, and the woods whispered of pursuits that left no trail. Elias pulled Clara deeper into the underbrush, the weight of inheritance settling like ash on his tongue. The elder's gift, or curse, had taken root, subtle as a fever's first chill. By morning, mirrors would lie for them too, if they survived the night. The lantern's flame guttered low in the damp cellar air, casting jagged shadows that clawed at the stone walls like desperate fingers. Eliza's hands trembled as she gripped the iron poker, its tip still glowing faintly from the hearth above. Beside her, Tom knelt by the trapdoor, his breath coming in shallow rasps, eyes fixed on the figure sprawled across the packed earth floor. Old Man Holloway, grandfather, they had called him once, lay there, his chest rising and falling in unnatural hitches, the stake driven through his ribs by Tom's own shaking hand. But he wasn't gone. Not yet. "Eliza," Tom whispered, his voice cracking like dry twigs. "He's moving. We can't just leave him like this." Sweat beaded on his forehead, mingling with the grime of their frantic flight through the hollows. The family Bible, clutched in his lap, lay open to the marked page, verses scrawled in faded ink about reflections stolen by the night, a warning their parents had dismissed as superstition until the mirrors in the attic shattered one by one. She didn't look at him, couldn't tear her gaze from the elder's face. His eyes, milky and unblinking, fixed on the lantern's light as if it were a distant sun he could never reach. No shadow stretched from him. Even now, the flames glow-pooled around his body like water avoiding a stone. The air thickened with a copper tang of blood, seeping from the wound, but it didn't pool right. It seemed to writhe, pulling back toward the flesh as if alive. Eliza's mind raced back to the hollow's edge, where they'd lured him under the false moon, the silver locket, mother's heirloom, dangling from a branch to mimic a reflection he craved. It had worked, drawing him from the shadows where the rest of the elders lurked, their forms twisting through the mist like smoke from a dying fire. A low groan escaped grandfather's lips, not pain, but hunger, a sound that echoed the wind through the pines outside, carrying the distant howls of the pack that had once been kin. Eliza's stomach twisted. Aunt Clara, Uncle Josiah. They'd come for the children next, the ones untainted, their no reflections a curse passed down from some forgotten sin in the old country. The hollows of Tennessee hid many secrets in 1855, but this one had festered in their bloodline for generations, elders feeding on the young to cling to unlife. "Tom, the salt line," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her gut. She nodded to the white powder they'd hastily poured across the threshold earlier, a barrier born of half-remembered lore from the Bible's margins. It had held the others at bay when the cellar door rattled under their assault, fists like battering rams echoing through the night. But grandfather had slipped through, his form half-substantial, whispering promises of eternal family if they'd just let him in. Tom scrambled to reinforce it, his fingers digging into the sack, spilling grains that glittered like fallen stars. As he worked, grandfather's hand twitched, inching toward the lantern. Eliza pressed the poker closer, the heat warping the air between them. "Stay down," she hissed, brave words masking the terror that this might not end it, that the curse could leap to her, to Tom, leaving them hollow shells haunting these woods forever. The elder's lips curled, revealing teeth too sharp for a man long dead inside. "Child, join us. The light blinds you still." His voice slithered, pulling at memories, summer evenings by the creek, stories of ancestors who walked without shadows, guardians of the hollow. But Eliza saw the lie now, the cost of those tales, the way Mother's eyes had dulled before she vanished into the mist 2 harvests past. Tom finished the line and stood, wiping his hands on his trousers, his cautious nature yielding to a flicker of resolve. "We burn it all," he said, not a question. He fetched the lantern's oil flask, the one they'd saved for this moment, and doused the body. The fumes rose sharp, stinging their eyes. Eliza nodded, striking flint to steel. The spark caught, and flame bloomed across grandfather's form, slow at first, then roaring as if the darkness itself ignited. He thrashed, a silhouette without outline, his cries merging with a crackle of fire devouring cloth and bone. The cellar filled with acrid smoke, forcing them back toward the stairs, coughing, tears streaming. They burst into the night air as the blaze licked at the beams overhead, the cabin's frame groaning in protest. Outside, the hollows seemed to hold their breath, the mist receding, the howls fading to silence. Tom collapsed against the porch rail, the Bible tumbling from his grasp. Eliza stood watch, poker still in hand, scanning the tree line where the elders' shapes had gathered earlier, drawn by the scent of blood. Dawn crept over the ridges, painting the sky in hesitant pinks. No reflections stirred in the dew-kissed grass, but the curse's echo lingered in the wind, a reminder that some shadows never fully lift. The Holloways would rebuild, two siblings scarred but whole, forever glancing over shoulders at mirrors that might one day betray them too. The family name endured, but its elders were ash now, scattered to the Tennessee soil, their unlife broken by fire and salt and the stubborn light of kin who refused to fade.